Marjorie Adey Prushaw. My former neighbor Marge was proactive in organizing where she lived. Until age 88, she was still mowing her own grass and trimming the edges with the weed eater. She was not a gardener, yet she had a storehouse of outstanding fake flowers, which she purchased in California. She used to look in my garden to see what was blooming, then create her own seasonal display. Walking by on the sidewalk, you couldn't tell that hers were artificial. She didn't need to water them either. Marge disposed of her late husband Norval's workshop of equipment and tools, as well as their house full of a lifetime's accumulation when she sold her house in 2003, 8 years after he died at 84. She moved to a rental apartment in Villa Anna. After her heart attack at 95, Marge began a gradual decline. She chose Kiwanis Assisted Living for her next move. It took 2 additional years to get there. Someone less capable or less independent would surge to the top of the lengthy waiting list. Need was considered ahead of age. When her turn finally came in 2011, she was thrilled with the suite and its location in the corner at the back, where she could look at trees and watch deer nibbling on the shrubs. She totally loved the socialization, routine, staff, and organized activities after living alone for many years. As the months passed, I spent more and more time with her, even becoming the principal local contact person on her medical records. I encouraged her to share parts of her life story with me. Marjorie Adey was born in Port Alberni, July the 3rd, 1914. She, her parents, and 2 older brothers moved to Powell River on the west coast of BC a few years later. After several months in the town site, the family took up residence at Michigan Landing, currently Willingdon Beach. Their house was near the creek, close to where the bandstand is now. A tall cedar fence surrounded their entire area, down to about the museum. They had 2 cows, a horse, and a huge garden. They were the only residents at that time. Later, other cabins were built across the creek heading north. When the mill declined to renew their lease, the Adeys moved to the Higginson House on Willingdon Avenue. Willingdon was a dead-end dirt trail starting from Alberni Street. 6 weeks after a serious accident in the lumber yard at the mill, her father George ended up in a wheelchair, no longer able to work. In those days, there was no insurance or any other way of earning a living if you became incapacitated. About a year after the mishap, it was decided that his condition may in fact have been caused by the accident. Since the incident had not been properly reported, it was too late to get compensation. To earn a living, George had a second house built on the Willingdon property. It was built so that he could get around in it with his wheelchair. The Adeys moved into the new house and rented the old one. Even the tiny original garage was used as a rental at one time. There was also a cabin on the small landing down at the waterfront. Talk about living on the coast. Marge spent 3 years at boarding school in Vancouver before high school in Powell River. This was a difficult experience because many of the classes were given in French, which was unfamiliar to her. She believed her parents were trying to make a lady out of a girl who grew up a tomboy with 2 older brothers. Marge married Norval Prushaw, an American friend of her brother Cyril. They left for Seattle, where he worked in a shipyard during World War II. After the war, they made their way to Burnaby, where they bought an office equipment business after he spent 15 years as their repairman. Following the purchase, his main career was in sales. He sold out and retired in the 1970s, before computers entered our way of life. During Norval's working years, they enjoyed recreational living at Madeira Park. They had a mobile unit and later on a mobile home. Then Marge and Norval moved back to Powell River. She really wanted to retire to White Rock, but in hindsight, she enjoyed returning to Powell River. Their plan was to buy acreage just outside the municipality. To entice her back to Powell River, Norval had promised Marge a new house with a lawn and a fence around it. He would be in charge of the remainder of the property. What he really wanted was a place to build a shop and have junk. He was a very talented wood and metal worker who had built more than one boat. Marge's father suggested they move into one of his Willingdon houses. They did. Prushaw spent 6 months in California each winter. In the 1980s, they introduced us to the Snowbird way of life. We learned how to attend estate sales, flea markets, and garage sales. We ate in restaurants and went to dances with live music in the clubhouses of the many mobile parks. We have many countless pleasurable memories. Well after her 100th birthday, Marge had a fall in her Kiwanis suite. She rose out of her chair to close the curtains before going for supper, without waiting for her circulation to get moving. She attempted to step sideways, but her rubber-backed canvas shoe stuck to the carpeting, and she fell to the floor, cracking her hip. Days later, sitting in her easy chair, she reached for something on the floor, slid out of her chair, landing on the floor, breaking the same hip. Now she was wheelchair-bound. Marge's final home was Willingdon Creek. She was one of its first residents. In her words, "I had 150 good years." Her last year was not great. She passed away at 101 in 2016.